Good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Not yet, Davey. I wanted to give my undivided attention, and my attention has been very divided lately. But I will today, absolutely. No. I will. It is front of my mind. I was going to do it this morning, but then I had to run to the BMV. Hi, Sam. Okay, sorry. I just wanted to get everything all situated, as one does. Yes, but thankfully, I am all done. I officially live in Ohio again. Hey Nailed, hey sub account, how's it going? Alright my friends, it is mini painting day again. Chat, we are $267 away from 6K. Question about the Tiltify. Hopefully I have an answer about the Tiltify. Go ahead. Is it okay to ask what I'm doing? Of course. We are painting the minis from a Warhammer 40k combat patrol that we will give away as part of, so we're raising money for St. Jude this whole month of May. So we only have 2 days left. Every $5 gets you an entry, and this is one of the prizes, a combat patrol that I painted and I will send to you. If we buy a level, say the $25 one, does that count for $5 entries too? Yes. Every $5 donated, no matter in what way, gets you an entry. So 25 would be $5 entries. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, we are at, I know I don't have it on the YouTube format, but we are at $5,733 raised for St. Jude in the month of May. So I think it'd be really cool to make it to 6K. Are they different types of candy? Yes, hold on, I will. Where did I put it? Making a mess. Yes, so I have this Brain Blasters sour candy box, and there are levels. There's levels 1, 2, and 3. So 25 is level 1, and 50 I think is a level 3 candy. So yeah, see they have different levels on them. Thank you, Daniela. Did I try them? I have had to eat plenty of these sour candies, and they are sour. The level 1 I can deal with. The level 3 is like, it starts to make your eyes water a little bit. But yes, so this is what we are painting. We're painting this box of Space Marine Combat Patrol. So I have built and primed everything, and then these guys we started working on last stream. Gotta go, but I'll sub to you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, sub account, you know, for the kids. No, I very much appreciate any YouTube subs and stuff like that. That helps me tremendously as I keep trying to do this whole content creation thing. Okay, chat. So yeah, this is our Infernus squad. I would really like to finish. I think that's a bit ambitious. I was gonna say I'd really like to finish these today. I'd really like to get a lot of it done today. So let's get all situated. Gosh. You broke the stream. Are we still alive? No worries at all, Daniela. I appreciate you just being here, and like I said, the sub means the most. Thank you, thank you. Have a wonderful day, my friends. Sorry, chat. I'm trying to bring up...
Thank you.
What the heck? Sub account, thank you for the $300 to St. Jude. What the heck? That is $6,033 to St. Jude in a month. That's crazy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I will... Yeah, remember the original goal of 1K? You guys are insane. I'm not gonna do it, like, all at once, because I will get sick, but I will have... What is that? Six level 3 candies? So I'll get them, and then I will... Look at that math, chat. Thank you so much, sub account. Yeah, I guess we gotta change the... And now, I mean, it's not an even number anymore, so now we just gotta shoot for 7K, right? Alright, let's see. These ones don't have a level on them. And I don't want to cheat you. But there's a ton of these guys. I am in New Zealand? I am not. I am in the US. Yeah, these little guys don't have a These little guys don't have a level on them, it doesn't look like. But there's a ton of them, so I'd like... And these are easy to eat. Those are level 2. This is level 1. Yeah, I wish that these had levels on them. But we will do this sour powder. It sucks. Yeah, this is kind of... This needs thrown away. Oh my goodness, I just threw a... Good thing there was a lid on that paint. Alright, this is what we're doing. It's like Fun Dip without the fun. Okay, this will be good. Well, not good, but this will work for the... I have a gift of someone eating this, or eating Fun Dip. The only thing I really liked from Fun Dip was the little sugar, like, sugar sticks. Alright, hold on. That was just a... Alright, I think we can get 6 from this. Again, I'm not doing it all in one because I will promptly have to end stream. Oh my goodness, why did I do all this? Look. Alright. That's like... You can, like, feel it up here. Ugh. Face of a champion. And the worst part is I only have hot tea. I didn't bring in my water bottle. That is not refreshing for that. Oof. Can I please turn what train back on? I knew he knew everything. True. He does know everything. Okay, let's get started. Hi Jared, how are you? Best mod ever. Aw. Okay, let's get started. Again, so this modular paint set, chat, remember we have 2 of these to give away as well, which are really cool. This is what I use when I paint, obviously, as I'm sitting here using it. It is wonderful. It has a wet palette in it. And it doesn't just have to be for Warhammer painting. You can use it for any kind of painting. Alright, so we did all of the base coating, the blue base coating. I think Since we passed 6K, we have to figure out something. Brianna has to freehand paint a bear. Oh my gosh. I would suck at that. Alright, I'm gonna hide the ball pit just so people can see. Alright, let's get going. So I always struggle with what I want to do next from here. I think that the belts are blue. Like, it just always seems like these belts should be like a tactical color, like you know, the same as all the rest of their stuff, but it's not. Alright. I'm going to need to make my coffee. Yeah, I almost sat down without making anything and I was like, no. Alright, let's paint. See, and these wet palettes are nice, chat, because my paint is still wet. We're gonna paint the belts that I forgot to do blue here. Today, we will not be able to avoid putting on the glasses. We've got some very detailed things we have to do today. I'm just going to touch up anything that I can see that I missed the first time through. I did a pretty alright job base coating, but let's see. But yeah, Chad, I was able to get yesterday I got my Ohio driver's license all figured out and my title, but then I had to go back this morning and get my registration and my plates and stuff. All to have to do it again in 2 months when I move again. Unfortunately, my Tennessee registration was expiring tomorrow. It was expiring tomorrow, so I had to do it. Pay extra because I drive a hybrid. Yay! And by extra, I mean $100 extra. Seriously, thank you guys all for being here in the YouTube chat and in the Twitch chat. Today is going to be a very chill day. We are just going to be painting because your girl is very behind on painting these. And I want them to be in a good spot. Or I want to be able to send them out pretty quickly after we draw the winner and stuff. Again, we are raising money for St. Jude. We have just surpassed $6,000 raised for St. Jude this month. We are slowly creeping up on 100K just raised for St. Jude total. We're at 130 30K or so lifetime for other for all charities, which is really cool. And yeah, every $5 you donate, you get an entry into a raffle that we are doing of a whole bunch of different prizes. We have 6 land cards that were open, 6 Magic the Gathering land cards that were opened and signed by Shroud. You may have heard of him. We have this combat patrol that I'm obviously painting for you, and I will send out. We have 2 of these modular paint sets that our sponsor Cardroofy was so amazing. We have 2 adventuring party bundles from Dragon Roast Coffee to give away. Speaking of amazing sponsors. And finally, one more amazing sponsor, we have 2 GGT's t-shirts to give away. And that will come actually in the form of store credit. And then you will get, that way you don't have to worry about, like, you know, making sure it's, like, we didn't have to try and coordinate sizes. You will just get the store credit and you will purchase it yourself. And it will be wonderful. And then we're also giving away a $50 either Steam, Xbox, or PlayStation gift card, depending on the winner. That way, you know, somebody who doesn't have a PC doesn't win a Steam gift card or something like crazy. So I suppose I could do a Nintendo one as well if people only have Switch. CC, thank you for the lurk. Normally sub account, I would be all for that if it were my own minis, but since I'm giving these away, I want to make sure that they're good. So I would say no. Marty, thank you for the lurk. Thank you. As you make your Dragon Roast coffee right now, yay. Yeah, Chad, I figure this is a good way for you guys to try things out too that you may not have tried out yet. Yeah, all of the sponsors have been just absolutely amazing in support of our charity stream. I've never been able to do a physical prize pool quite like this one, so I'm incredibly grateful. With little old streamers like me, it's hard to get that kind of stuff without, you know, spending a bunch of your own money. So I'm very grateful. But we got it done. Heck yeah. Absolutely vouch for the coffee. It's so good. And it's just so creative and fun. Like, it's a fun concept. So Chad, if you didn't know, all of their coffees, or most of their coffees, are named after D&D classes. And then the coffee itself is kind of meant to reflect what each one of those classes represents. It's really, really cool. And again, it's yummy coffee. Need to reorder again soon. Yeah, I'm getting low on mine. I had way too much for the longest time, and now we're finally, because my mom is here too, and she's a big coffee drinker, so. Barbarian is I really like the Barbarian roast, which I usually like the more cocoa notes, because I drink usually dark roast, which is that's a pretty common flavor among dark roasts, is like a cocoa flavor. And the little hit of cinnamon is just amazing with it. So this I'm doing just very, very broadly, chat. I'm just going through and touching up anything that I missed the first time I base coated, and then we'll move on to the more exciting like details and stuff, and it'll start to really take shape after that. But it's easier. I mean, once I move on to, you know, the washing and stuff like that, it you kind of beyond base coating, so. Been ordering all 4 and rotating. I love that. Yeah, I usually get some type of bundle if they have it because I can't decide. And I love that you can get the smaller bags as well, if you want to, you know, trial everything. Okay. And that's why I'm very excited for people to win the Adventuring Party bundle, because that is what got me into the coffee. So chat, that, if you're not familiar with that, that is 3 of their coffees. I believe it's, oh god, I believe it's the Paladin, oh god, the Paladin, the Monk, and maybe the Barbarian. So it's a good mix of all their different coffees, or a handful of their different coffees. Definitely not all of them. And yeah, remember chat, we're gonna make the prize draw stream a celebration. So I think we're gonna do like a little mini cooking stream or baking stream. I haven't decided what time of day I'll do it. Not that I can't do both at any time of day. And just make it a celebration. I'll draw names, I'll cook, we'll drink, we'll whatever. I think that could be really fun. For sure, baby. I don't have a date or time in mind, so it's definitely flexible. Oh no, his little thingies. Cool. Okay, we're actually in pretty good shape. I thought there would be a lot more patchy spots, but really it's not too bad. Oh no. I don't know what I want to do. I always struggle with what I want to do next. Like, if I want to do I'll probably do the trim. Because that's a bit tedious. It's nowhere near my Thousand Suns boys, though, so we will survive. Okay. This one must have been like my first one or something. It is patchy. I was out of practice still. I'm still out of practice, but we're getting back into it.
Thank you.
Bangles, thank you for the $300 to St. Jude. Thank you so much. Paying it forward for the kids. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What the heck? Thank you. I'm overwhelmed. Chat, so for anybody who doesn't know, up there, the blue part of the bar, did it go through? It did. Thank you so much. So for anybody who doesn't know, the blue part of the bar was the original goal. All of the gold is beyond that. So thank you guys so much. I am blown away, as I so usually am. Chase didn't notify you. It might take a second. Sometimes banks, it takes a minute for it to process on their end, but it did go through. Thank you so much. Henry, thank you for the raid. How are you? How was your stream? What'd you get up to? Hello. How are you? Thank you so much, my friend. Trials? Ugh. Yeah, Henry, I mean, in that, I am team leave bed rotting social media every time, so good. I'm glad you were able to do that. Thank you so much for the raid. Okay, I think we're good with blue for a bit. I think. Ugh, we still have one more. You're upsetty spaghetti though? Why? Alright, this is another redemption for sub account. I really need to get water before I do that again. And not tea. Ugh. Heard they're messing it up. How are they messing it up? Tore up half the trees to add more roads. But unfortunately, as things get more popular, that is an unfortunate side effect, but a necessary one. But then they didn't get more funding, so they stopped halfway through. Ugh. Yeah, that sucks. But hopefully they're able to secure it. Okay, what do I want to do now? I think I'm gonna paint. I think I'm gonna paint the black. Yeah, I think I'm gonna paint the black parts just to get those out of the way. W painting, by the way. Thank you. We're getting there. Now we have the boring part out of the way, so we can do the fun stuff. Trying to steal your breakfast sandwich? Well, but maybe it's hers. Did you ever think of that? Time for this freeloader to get a job. on garden talk, like actual gardening, not the bad kind. There's this one guy who has chickens, and he always says that they need to pay their rent, and it's when he goes to collect eggs. Question? Hopefully I have an answer. What's up? All right. Clean these. They're smudgy. I have no way of knowing that, Henry, because I have absolutely no idea. And no, you should not get a chiropractor to do it. No, I mean, if it's still, if they took x-rays and there was nothing wrong, you might have just jammed it. No, I would not start messing with it like you can pop it back in, because it might not be popped out of place. If you jammed it, it could just be jammed. I would just let it be for a while, and if it heals, it heals. But no, the last thing you want to do is start pushing like it's one thing and it not be. Been watching Farming While Beige, and it cracks me up every time he messes with his chickens. I love chickens. I clean these and then I try to put the lens back on without touching it, but you kind of have to touch it to click it back on, and then it smudges it up again. Completely defeats the purpose. Ready to be over with this home health fiasco to be done? Or I'm ready. You're ready for it to be done? Here's hoping. Oof. Putting these glasses on, I see so many spots I missed. Yikes. Some of them were intentional, but some of them definitely were not. I think they're in the final one. Good. Go real light here to start, chat, while I remember where I want to paint here. This painting with black always freaks me out regardless.
Trust what you say.
That needs to be lead belcher, but that's okay. is why I paint sub-assembly chat. Okay. His little booty. Wonder how the Emperor would feel if he knew that I just called his genetic superhumans a booty. Missed all of his fingers on the opposite side. That sucks. Grown so much. Yep. It's been a while. I've lived a lot of lives. God, it is absurd how much I missed the first time. Okay. had your 16-year anniversary at your job. That's awesome. Rats. It's been 5 years since you moved from home. That's awesome. Yeah, time flies. Let that. $45 and only had 2 jobs since you were 17. That's insane to me. Like not in a bad way. It's just, it's so different from my experience. I had 3 different jobs before I was even 18. That's awesome, Davey. That makes it a lot easier to want to work. Hey, that's good, Henry. Okay. Touch up some of these spots. Nice. This is not the right brush for this. Get in here. I cannot do this. Not with this brush. There's so many spots. Again, see, this is why I paint in sub-assembly, chat. I hate knowing that there's so many little spots that I can't get to. That would take way too long to do these ones. Like, I know it doesn't matter because you can't see them unless you have 20x magnifying glasses and a light on them like I do, but it matters, you know? Oh, that sucks. Thanks. Yeah, Henry, it's annoying, and it's even more so now, like, knowing that this will be going to somebody, it makes me want to try even harder. If it were just for me, it would bother me, but not nearly as much. God, my posture when I paint is so bad. Shit. This is why I shouldn't look at minis too long after, because I find a billion different issues. Yeah, I totally get that, Henry. But also, I mean, it's important to remember that, like, you're never trapped in anything, in any job, in any role, in any path. Just by accepting one thing does not mean that, like, you're locked in. Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, it looks we're starting to come together a little bit. I just have to ensure that whoever wins this doesn't also have these magnifying glasses. Because they'll be able to see the mistakes a lot more. That's a condition to winning. Do you have these magnifying glasses? If yes, sorry. Can't win.
What the hell just happened? Somehow I'm still standing, but I'm asking what for. And it's tragic, and I swear it's the saddest.
Yeah, I can see that, Henry. If they like, especially if they don't think that you're interested in it, and that's kind of where I'm like, I don't know. I approach things with the mentality of like, if the opportunity presents itself and it's reasonable, I'm gonna try it. You're never married to one thing. Like, you don't. If you get into that and you don't like it, that's okay. At least you tried it. But also, I have that approach with jobs, with positions, with places to live. Go try it out. If I don't like it, I'll move. I think it's incredibly important that we don't limit our view Everything is transient. Nothing is permanent. The good and the bad. It's not all or nothing. Exactly. Very few things are. There we go. That's what I wanted to see. Oh, I can't do it with this brush. I need new brushes, Chad. lot of paint on this little gun handle. It does not look like a handle anymore, but that's okay. I hate painting with black. It is not, Bengals. We surpassed that. Okay. Now you guys see why it takes so long, because it's a lot of back and forth. A lot of back and forth. I have such shaky hands. Trust the process indeed.
Times when we fall and we break, but we don't realize that falling is just what it takes, so we learn how to climb. We've been chasing the light, but it's always inside, and you know that deep from the heart we can see where it all belongs.
Okay. We're gonna switch to another one. Oh, this one sits. I did much better with this one. With the base coating. Not perfect, but much better. did miss quite a bit of this side of his head, though, so it's awkward. Shit. Whoops. Sorry, buddy. That was way too thin of paint. And you stick on it. Broke the stream? You didn't break the stream. Enjoy dinner. Wait. It's noon. making so many mistakes. Gosh, went from way too thick to way too thin to way too thick paint. Got impatient. Hurts my back, Chet.
For the darkness to feel weightless without feet on the ground. Can you feel it? Don't conceal it. Let's reveal it. Let me hear it.
Sounds good, Henry. Enjoy outside.
My feet now moving into lightness.
That sounds wonderful, baby. I was supposed to go walking with Kayla on the bike trail yesterday, but I was having horrible dizzy spells, so I did not do that. Hi, Kimmy. It's good to see you. Thank you for lurking. Whoops. Cat's food dropping. Let's see who comes in. I know I messed up elsewhere, but I can't remember where I need to correct. I guess if I can't find it, that's pretty good. A pretty small mistake if I can't find it, but...
Thank you.
Oh, it's so small. Hold on. I gotta go this way. Sam, thank you so much for the $25 to St. Jude. Thank you, thank you. It's so funny when I look like this, I can't see anything. Thank you so much. Oh, I owe a level 1 sour candy, huh? There's a handful of these. Cheers. Shit. Ah. Ugh. Alright, I'm gonna put back on this lore video chat while we keep painting. Oh. Hold on.
As so often is the case, very little information exists from this time, largely due to the Imperium being so wary of a similar disaster happening again. And this is why, amongst the Imperium and mankind, you'll find only the simplest forms of AI. It is viewed as being exceptionally dangerous technology and is strictly outlawed. A substitute is often to combine human and machine into mindless drone-like beings known as servitors. Servitors are the Imperium's cybernetic servants, lacking true self-awareness, and are created from the bodies of either condemned criminals who are unpleasantly lobotomized, or vat-grown humanoids whose bodies and brains are partially replaced with machine systems. As a result of this catastrophic conflict between the men of iron and humanity in the golden age of technology, it is now considered one of the most severe crimes in Imperial society to develop a self-aware artificially intelligent machine. It is just considered too dangerous to even consider. Around Millennium 23, the warp was taking hold of psychers and wreaking havoc on human colonies. Feudal night worlds were more conservative and less abiding of psychers, as we said previously, who had hunted them down. These would fare better than the others who had adopted them more open-mindedly at the time. The knights in their semi-titan armour would battle massive warp entities and serve to protect the planet's human population, abiding to their strict code of feudal discipline and ability. Very often they would be the bastions that protected mankind's worlds, and their importance cannot be underestimated at this time. As is often the case in history, it is not one but a series of disasters that leads to total ruination, and this was no exception for the glorious empire humanity had established during the Dark Age of technology. Whilst it was struggling to recover from a collapse in its unity, as well as destruction of many of its resources and its ability to trade efficiently with other worlds, a new disaster would occur that would see the end of humanity's golden age and instead throw us further into near total annihilation. The race of man would never again reach this golden pinnacle of technological achievement. As we learned in ancient Eldar lore, it was at this time that the Eldar out in the galaxy would fall into near total destruction. These would be dark days indeed, as the Eldar were almost wiped out in a cataclysmic annihilation as the Chaos God Slaanesh was born into existence from the horrifically depraved mire that Eldar society had fallen into. This was a disaster for the Eldar, nearly extinguishing their light from the universe completely, but it didn't do humanity any favours either. The near destruction of the Eldar and birth of Slaanesh only came to mark the end of the Age of Strife. What caused it prior to these events was the ever-expanding sea of psychic energy known as the Warp. For many millennia, this had been growing more and more powerful, fueled by the nightmarish depravity that was Eldar society. Around the end of Millennium 24 and the beginning of 25, mankind was still struggling to recover from the disastrous war against its Men of Iron and its far-reaching impact on the previously secure and strong human federation. With their galactic unity destroyed, as well as suffering from the inevitable wounds of war, material shortages, mass loss of life and destruction of infrastructure, we would now face a new problem. Warp travel was becoming increasingly difficult. The warp's instability, caused in part by the Eldar's depraved psychic society, meant that many ships now would become lost and consumed by the warp as they were travelling through. This was not an issue for the Eldar themselves, as they used their webways to travel, which were outside of that warp space. For humanity though, it would be a severe problem, and its impact would deal the fatal blow to an already fragile empire. The losses and damage caused by the war with the Men of Iron, combined with now being unable to travel across the warp to cross those great distances in the galaxy, would ultimately return humanity to a pre-Dark Age of technology state, where only sublight travel was possible. This was a disaster. Trade and support could no longer be conducted, as these journeys would now take generations to complete. Humanity was once again isolated as it had been millennia before. The warp storms and the isolation they would create would last for over 5,000 years, and their effect on human society across the galaxy was catastrophic. Some planets with a significantly advanced human colony would survive into the future if they had the means to defend and support themselves. It's important to understand that when a system is set up with no established backup, its collapse has an immediate and profound impact. This was the case with mankind's trade system. It had grown over time to enable many planets to survive solely on imports from other rich parts of the human federation. Without this infrastructure and no way to gain outside support, disaster was inevitable. Many would turn inwardly to the colony, consuming themselves from the inside out, first with barbaric civil war and later total anarchy, fighting over the scarce resources that remained. The final phase often led the significantly depleted population into a feudal system of warlords and barbarism. This chaos was repeated across the majority of human worlds in this period, even including Earth. At this time on Earth, large areas across the planet had become massive cities reaching for hundreds of miles, and having become adapted to a system where all activities were conducted by machines, Earth also now relied heavily on trade from colonized worlds to support the extremely high population count. Additionally, much of the planet was no longer capable of food production and hadn't been for millennia. hence the need for colonies and expansion in the first place. With the inability to travel and trade, Earth descended into a similar fate of the less advanced worlds. First panic and general disorder, then food riots, resource hoarding, and finally complete anarchy. A tribal warlord system was all that remained of the few survivors left on Earth, brutal warriors who battled out across the deserts and hives of the remnants of civilization. This whole situation might sound unbelievable that society could collapse so quickly and to such a severe degree, but it's worth considering that in this time human society had built itself up to be so strong in belief of its own invincibility that they simply did not and could not have anticipated the severity of the warp storms or how they would debilitate the trade and support systems that they had been relying upon. Human history is littered with examples of sheer arrogance outweighing logic and reason, as well as blindly staring down dangerous facts in favour of belief in our own self-importance. The lack of planning when it comes to losing their infrastructure across human systems was an acute example of human arrogance. It would now seem as well that whatever had protected human psyches from demonic possession would now end. It's my speculation that, as previously stated, the Emperor was what provided this shielding, even though he was not known to humanity at this time, for he knew the power, importance and value of human psyches in the dark times that would lie ahead. Without this bubble of protection that had invisibly existed prior to this time, humanity's weak psyches would be consumed, possessed, and go completely insane, causing chaos among isolated, colonized worlds. This period of complete anarchy would last for some 5,000 years, and during this time many colonies would forget their family out in the galaxy, as well as losing vast amounts of technology and knowledge. Only fragments of the glory of humanity would remain, preserved on the advanced worlds who were capable to survive this dark time. By the 28th millennium, almost all traces of civilization on Earth were gone. Instead, techno-barbarians battled one another over the scraps of the ancient human race. Mars, however, was one of the few worlds to undergo a different process. After a brief period of anarchy, the tech priests of the cult Mechanicus emerged victorious over the Psyker mutants and then unified their homeworld. The priests visited Earth, but upon seeing its barren destruction, wrote it off as unsalvageable. They used any titans they had to help them in the future reunification of man. They would also be one of the few worlds to reach out and recolonize planets in this time. Using their knowledge of the warp, they chose moments of calm amid the storms of the time in the warp to travel through and establish new forge worlds. These were replicas of the tech homeworld of Mars and enabled them to continue support and recovery of the technology of man, as well as production of munitions and simpler war machines. But for humanity, its golden age was over. This dark age of technology had fallen apart catastrophically. Many of the weapons that once served mankind brought us to near destruction and turned lush garden worlds into irradiated deserts. Mechanical factory worlds into dystopian nightmares, beautifully advanced and artistic colonies turned into barbaric, nightmarish hells devoid of all morality. The age of strife was upon mankind, and only the further darkness of the future lay ahead. Roughly 5,000 years later, around the period of millennium 30 to 31, human society had reached a state of pitiful decay after cannibalizing itself for millennia. The Eldar had also reached the peak of their social decay, and so heralded the agonizing birth of the Chaos god Slanesh, who would consume the majority of their population in one cataclysmic event that brought Eldar society to the brink of extinction. This horrific event, though, would have a positive outcome for mankind. It consumed all of that stored turbulent warp energy, so after thousands of years of instability, the warp returned to relative calm. Interstellar communication and travel would once again be possible for the civilization of mankind. So the age of strife was coming to an end. But before we move forward, we need to move back some 2,000 years to M28 to M30. Humanity had now come close to the brink of destruction itself. So many worlds had fallen into disarray, starvation, chaos, anarchy. Now was the time. This would be the time where the mysterious and powerful psyker who had wandered amongst humanity for thousands of years would come to the fore to lead humanity from an edge of unsalvageable darkness back into the light and resume their place as a meaningful power in the galaxy. Earth had by now been reduced to a chemically irradiated barren wasteland, its population slaughtered, and all that remained were degenerate feral nomads fighting for irrelevant territories, insane wandering prophets and cyber-augmented techno-barbarians who lived for nothing other than to fight, created in the cradle of world-ending war. Frail empires would rise and disintegrate as quickly and forgettably as they had risen. No tribe or faction had enough power or resources to make any meaningful stand, and so it went on, pathetic fighting over the remnants of a ravaged world. Out of this seemingly endless horror came a single man, a warlord like no other. His title in these early days is unknown, but we would know who he would rise to become: the Emperor of Man. He would first conquer and then rebuild humanity, leading it into the light, saving it from itself to form his autocracy, known as the Imperium of Mankind. Unlike so many before him though, he had power not only as an unstoppable warrior, but in many other traits such as rational thinking, tactics, philosophy, economics, compassion, foresight, and perhaps most importantly, a genius of science, everything and more that would be required for a supreme leader. The Emperor, though, fought not for selfish personal gain or bloodlust of war like all the other scattered remnants of humanity left on Earth. He had selfless, higher goals to restore humanity spiritually, intellectually, and physically, to revert us to a time of strength and prosperity. These were the years of the Unification Wars. The Emperor had long held a facility deep in a range of mountains previously known as the Himalayas. This was his most significant stronghold and would later become the Imperial Palace. Here he experimented with genetics as well as developing and constructing weapons and armour for his warriors. In the earliest days, he would physically and genetically augment some of the most powerful barbarians. These humanoids would become known as the Thunder Warriors. The very first of their kind and the most basic template for what would eventually become the Imperial Space Marines, the Astartes, the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Under unsurmountable pressure from the Emperor's army of Thunder Warriors, the barbaric factions fell quickly and humanity was united on old Earth for the first time in centuries. This, however, would come at a terrible cost for the Thunder Warriors themselves, and is one of the least known yet darkest events for mankind. In order to unify Earth and bring humanity back on the path of advancement and strength, the Emperor had found it necessary to in part cleanse the savagery that had grown on the war-torn planet. This sadly meant the death of many arguable innocents during the Unification Wars, as well as the eradication of the last remaining religious church on Earth, known as the Church of the Lightning Stone. The Emperor is known to have personally spoken to the last remaining priest before bringing in his new age of enforced secular rationalism and the ideology known as the Imperial Truth. This essentially tells that humanity are now those destined to be the rulers of the galaxy. The Eldar had their chance and failed, and now humanity are the best set to take their place as the dominant force. This ideology would soon be brought to all the scattered worlds of humanity in the long crusade that was yet to come. Now, the official version of things tells how the last battle of the Unification Wars takes place on Mount Ararat. This siege to cleanse the last of the techno-barbarians from the ruined wastes on Earth and finally bring it back to a time of peace and growth was said to be so brutal that waves of Thunder Warriors fell against the rocks and resistance were slain to a single man, the legendary warrior Arik Taranis, the Lightning Bearer. He would raise the banner of lightning to mark the end of the Unification Wars, setting in place the rule of the Emperor of Man, before he too would fall to fatal wounds suffered in this battle of legend. As with many things, the official version is not the end of the story. The actuality of the event was darker and far more sinister. The Emperor knew that in order to restore peace, growth and
It's
a sense
going.
of civilization to his new and
Making
expanding
progress.
empire, he would require a more stable and balanced force than the Thunder Warriors, who were essentially just adept brutes recruited from the wasteland, albeit clad in the earliest Imperial armor. In a necessary betrayal, the Emperor realized that in order to safeguard what he had achieved, his army of barbaric fighters could not exist past this time. It is believed that he actually ordered the many Thunder Warriors who had survived the final battle to be slaughtered by his elite guard, and possibly even some of the early proto-Astartes who were at this time far advanced beyond most of his standard force. This terrible secret has been concealed from the people of the Imperium for more than 10,000 years, and were it ever to be revealed, the consequences could be unimaginably disastrous. The Emperor, though, saw this necessary evil had to come to pass for the greater good, a sacrifice of the few to save the many who would come. The Thunder Warriors were built for war, and war alone, and would not be able to adapt to a time of peace, and could even have turned a vital tool into a dangerous, unstable threat that could unbalance all that he had achieved. In order for the next stage of his plans, he also required that humanity rally behind him as the sole and most powerful force. The slaughter of the Thunder Warriors was not the last act of betrayal, though, by the Emperor. He would then take the necessary glory that he had near single-handedly reunified Terra. This distortion of the truth, while hugely distasteful, does appear largely necessary to reunite the whole of humanity and create the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. Nonetheless, should the truth ever arise, it would at best split apart the Imperium and at worst destroy it. These choices by the Emperor are important to remember in the context of his character, as it can lead to certain logical speculations regarding future events. Some Thunder Warriors, though, would find fate on their side and escape this mass killing and live on as homeless unknowns, seeking out a miserable existence at the bottom of society. Honours forgotten, their deeds meaningless, all the while fearing constant discovery from the Imperium and certain death. This heartless betrayal was surely one of the darkest periods in Imperial history. They were never hunted, though, in any significant way. The Emperor believed them all dead, and besides, they were far more important tasks at hand, as the Emperor now gathered a team of gene wrights salvaged from the few remaining humans on Earth. These were men with practical knowledge of genetics to aid in his development of the new Astartes project. Those Thunder Warriors who did escape were not like the Astartes of the 41st millennium. They were genetically unstable, and most significantly, they only had a minimally extended mortality beyond that of a regular human, unlike the Space Marines who can live on for thousands of years. The Emperor had been working for decades on his Astartes project, deep within his mountain facility. Here he would create the vital foundations that would springboard humanity into a new age. His experiments would create the 20 Space Marine legions, known as the Legiones Astartes, as well as 20 Primarchs to lead each legion. These 20 supreme leaders of the soon-to-come Space Marine legions were crafted by the Emperor using samples of his own arcane genetic code as the base. It is obviously unknown the depth of which the Emperor used his own DNA to create the Primarchs, but later findings through ancient Imperial records do hint that he spliced multiple DNA types together, even going so far as to introduce some animal DNA into the Primarchs. And this would explain why some, such as Lehman Russ, would display the wolf-like qualities, and why these would then become present throughout the Space Wolves Legion and chapter. It is difficult to speculate on the Emperor's true goals here, and even if he was successful in the mixing of DNA in this way, it seems highly experimental, and perhaps he himself was not sure of the final result. This period of intelligent design was hasty and somewhat improvised given the dire situation facing mankind. It needed to repopulate its military power in order to springboard and take stage fights forward to reconquer the colonies. Another point of speculation is how closely the Primarchs were imbued with spiritual elements and others such as unnaturally skillful charisma and so on. Still though, in creating the Primarchs and even taking small elements of the Emperor's DNA, it imbued them with these demi-godlike characteristics. It also explains why at this time the barely known forces of chaos would seek out and scatter the developing Primarchs before the Emperor's plans could grow into fruition. Little is known of this Primarch scattering event, but it has been suggested that the dawning forces of chaos felt this expanding power from humanity to threaten them, and in an effort to slow or negate it, they reached out into the mortal world to seize and scatter the fetal Primarchs across the galaxy. Each world they found themselves on would surely in time come to realise that they were far from normal, often finding themselves as a natural leader in command of the systems that would become their home. Later the Emperor would one by one discover and reunite the Primarchs with their legions, establishing one of the most powerful military forces the galaxy had ever seen. The Thunder Warriors, though, were undoubtedly the early prototypes for the Astartes project, which subsequently makes their untimely end all the more tragic, as their sacrifice was so great, yet the memory of them was totally obliterated. The Astartes project would continue in a pragmatic manner. Each of the early legions at this time contained barely a few hundred marines. Their equipment was lightweight and somewhat improvised by comparison to later standards. They trained their minds and bodies to be the will, might and rule of the Emperor. Time would pass and their numbers grew. Each legion was divided not only for organisational reasons but also for practical reasons. Because of their adapted genetics that were drawn from the Primarchs, some carried traits and psychological behaviours which would not have been found comfortable comparison with their sibling legions. This segregation also allowed them to focus their bonds to their brothers in their own legion, creating a near unbreakable kinship between Astartes. If the newly created Astartes would be the Emperor's scalpel, his gleaming pinnacle of human achievement, then the Thunder Warriors were certainly a mace used to bludgeon the remnants of humanity back into submission. The Thunder Warriors were genetically stronger though, tougher, and could even be stronger in battle than the newly created Astartes, which is something people often forget. They were a rough, brutal instrument, but ultimately a temporary solution to a violent problem. The Space Marines would serve not only as a weapon, but as beacons to mankind, a glimmer of what humanity could hope to be. The dark times to come, however, would show that this was a misplaced belief, that while the Space Marines were created to represent the pinnacle of human development, they ultimately proved as susceptible to the basic flaws of mankind as any other mortal. The Emperor's campaign on Earth would now come to a close. He began establishing the fundamental elements of a civilized, modernized society in government administration, economy and infrastructure. An important figure in this process was a man known as Malkador, the Sigillite. He had a vast knowledge of such matters and carried himself with the bearing of a priest. He was appointed to run the courts and palaces of the new empire, the right-hand man of the Emperor. Earth would turn from a place of desolation and horror to one of active production, rebuilding and planning. Some might call it coincidentally convenient, but at this time a vast shockwave would travel through the galaxy, the birth of Slaanesh. Humanity would have no idea of the significance of this, only that it cleared the storms from the warp that had isolated and ruined humanity's gloriously technologically advanced empire. Again though, we could speculate that the Emperor had foreseen these events and the necessity of preparing Earth for this time. On Mars, the humans of the cult Mechanicus, that is those who worship machines, would become aware of this unification on Earth, as information through distant communication and physical observations. They viewed this new emperor as a man in alignment with their own agenda. Mars, during the Dark Age of technology, had been a planet with a single purpose, a powerhouse of production for this age, consolidating ships and weapons, including the vast Titans, hundreds of feet tall, gigantic bipedal war machines whose very presence could end conflicts before they began. Since the end of this age, cults had risen across the Mars, and the most prevalent of these was the Mechanicus, whose ideology included the veneration and acquisition of these ancient but highly advanced technologies from the period known as the Dark Age of technology. During the period of isolation known as the Age of Strife, Mars had undergone a similar societal collapse comparable to that of Earth. With all trade cut off, they had insufficient water and food to supply the populace. A civil war would follow, as well as the collapse of some planetary infrastructures that shielded their little remaining hydroponics and food production systems. This would lead to a further collapse of the already fragile supporting systems. The techs an established Mechanicum decided the best way to survive this apocalypse would be to retreat into underground bunkers which had been mined out, creating vast cities below the surface. Little is known at this time, but evidently prior to their seclusion, the Mechanicum techs were a cult who would bear a respect and drive to recover, protect and utilise the lost technologies of mankind. Upon their rise from the subterranean depths, they had in this time translated this over into a complete faith. The tech priests of the Mechanicum, along with their troops, would very quickly subdue the insane irradiated savages who remained on the surface and begin the process of rebuilding and redeveloping Mars to be completely self-sufficient. This, in combination with their access to some of the most powerful war machines ever forged in the galaxy, would without doubt leave the Mechanicus in a position of some power. To the cult of Mechanicus, who were now becoming aware of this emperor figure who had surfaced on Terra, a man of science and technology, this was obviously appealing to the Mechanicus, and some tech priests on Mars even began to suggest that the emperor was a man of such power as to rival their own machine god and fulfill an ancient prophecy in their faith of techno-mysticism. Debates raged on Mars between the priesthood regarding how to treat this new development. All the while, the Emperor, bearing his power of immense foresight, would not be ignorant of the Mechanicum, and he slowly and steadily would begin to craft his new plans accordingly. Plans for a crusade on a galactic scale never before seen. Its purpose? To locate the lost Primarchs, to reunite the territories of humanity, forge a new Imperial Empire, and thrust the Imperium of Man into a position of complete dominance and power throughout the galaxy. The Emperor's plan was one of absolute submission. Anyone who stood against the Imperial truth would be cleansed and destroyed. The Mechanicum of Mars were one of the few exceptions. The Emperor knew that any battle to try and claim dominance over the cult Mechanicum would be hugely counterproductive. Even if he could claim victory over them, the cost to his new Astartes force would be severe and unjustified. So he planned instead to offer a rare alliance with the Council of Tech Priests. In offering them assistance in their own goals and acquisitions of new and lost tech throughout the galaxy, they would provide support, construction of war gear and tech to Imperial forces. They also were one of the exceptional entities to be allowed to maintain a state of semi-independence within the Imperium, a fairly unique position. The Emperor would also provide a new group of navigators to enable the Mechanicum to travel through the warp again in search of fabled STC units. All of this suited the Mechanicum and Imperium in a symbiotic relationship, and an alliance was created. And so we reach the beginning of Millennium 31. With Mars now allied to the Emperor's Imperium, the Legiones Astartes war machine had significantly expanded. The Mechanicum would provide the battle barges needed to transport the Space Marines throughout the galaxy. They also brought to the table the Titans, some of the most powerful war machines ever created. Their very presence on approaching a humanoid system would often be enough to prevent a conflict. The shock and awe of facing such incomprehensible opponents would quickly lead a populace to understand they had no hope of preventing the Imperial Expeditionary Forces from achieving their goals. The crusade would initially be led by the Emperor himself, as he commanded a massive fleet of Astartes. As the crusade gathered pace and the Primarchs were recovered, these expeditionary fleets would number in the thousands. Before we talk about the crusade itself though, which I have tried to condense as much as possible, I want to first talk briefly on the Astartes or Space Marines. Now, a regular misconception about Space Marines is that because they wear near identical armour and were originally produced via a variation of cloning, or at least grown in a lab, that they somehow have no personality or little differentiation between them. It is also often assumed that Space Marines will blindly follow any commands given to the letter, no matter the consequences. After all, they are the superior, unquestioning warriors in the universe, right? Both of these myths is fundamentally wrong. Each Space Marine is an individual person with their own character, traits, to an extent personal principles. There are many documented events in which these human elements would have a role to play in subsequent events. Space Marines, although superhuman, are still human, and as such the Emperor deemed it necessary to have a senior position with whom Astartes could use as a point of reference to discuss matters of morality, to understand their purpose, their mission, and sometimes to give guidance beyond purely military matters during the Crusade and the expeditionary forces. Enter the Iterators. Imperial Iterators were the most persuasive of public speakers. They are masters of manipulating a crowd's opinion, and Iterators would counsel also Marines as they voyaged through the galaxy. But their role went beyond this and was critical at the inception of the Great Crusade. They were placed among the expeditionary forces to aid in reuniting humanity and turning lost human civilizations to the Imperial cause. The Emperor appointed them to spread the Imperial truth. Truths such as the rejection of religious faith to enforce secular rule, and unnecessary wasteful squabbling over power and resources. These were all seen as significantly counterproductive and opposite to the objectives of the Imperium. The first Primarch to be reunited with the Imperial fleet was Horus of the Lunar Wolves. He greatly admired the Iterators' work, so much so that he asked them to also tutor his captains and legionnaires. Horus believed that once the crusade was completed, there would be an end to the war, and that the Astartes would first need to find a peacetime vocation. The most famous Iterator during the Great Crusade was Primary Iterator Kyril Sindaman, who served aboard Horus's flagship. Iterators are seen as the precursors to Imperial Guard commissars and Astartes chaplains. The Iterators and then later the chaplains are an example of the more human services required by Space Marines. Documented records have shown that they have been regularly known to question ethics, purpose, and even their own morality, despite an Astartes essentially being immortal. They are destined to die in battle, as that is their true purpose. And despite this predefined fate, they are far from the emotionless drones that some would assume. They are a living embodiment of humanity, a distillation of spirit and mind. The Emperor's Great Crusade to reunify humanity had begun in earnest. This was an operation on a truly epic scale. Millions of troops, tens of thousands of ships forged by the Mars Mechanicum. This would be humanity's defining moment, to reach out and forge the greatest empire in the galaxy. The Imperial forces comprised soldiers, naval officers, and most importantly, the Astartes legions. They were configured and divided into expeditionary fleets supported by all manner of cruisers, transports, scout teams, dropships, and so on. Commanded by the Emperor and his war council, but also by individuals placed in charge of these expeditionary forces.
Like warp travel and stuff, it makes me want to play No Man's Sky.
These forces were as much exploratory as they were tasked with an important mission. A great deal of time had passed during the Age of Strife, as well as incalculable quantities of data had been lost in the process. The Imperial forces simply didn't know exactly where all the colonies were, nor their status. Had they been destroyed in civil war, alien genocide, or perhaps the opposite and expanded to a degree where they would not need aid but instead submission? All of these were unknowns. Many locations could be estimated as to whether or not they had been colonized in the past. The Mechanicum could provide some information from past scripture as to where human colonies had been located, although more importantly, they wanted to know where we could find ancient and undiscovered technology. The expeditionary fleet would even initiate a search on the basis of myths and rumour. No stone was to be left unturned in the search for the lost civilizations of mankind. Before they embarked on their journey though, one other important task was required. Although the warp storms had subsided, allowing travel once again across great distances, the Navigator class from the past that would guide ships through the warp. This system though was far from perfect, and the Emperor had a greater plan. On Earth, the Emperor ordered construction of the Great Astronomicon. Tech priests from Mars were drafted in to aid in this project, and its purpose would be to enable the Emperor to guide, oversee, and command his vast fleet all from Terra. It created a system for him to focus, amplify, and broadcast psychic signals and energy. It would stand as an unchanging marker, a lighthouse for the navigators, a point of reference around which they could plan all their travels. This certainly was an important factor in the success of the crusade, as it enabled the navigators to travel through the warp in great leaps and faster than they ever had done before. In addition to this, the Emperor would also create the astropaths. These were powerful psykers whose sole task would be in relaying communications from the fleet and later the established Imperium back to the ruling council on Terra. The vast distances involved meant that the astropaths would become the only communication link between Terra and the distant colonies. However, as with the Eldar, the risk of possession to the astropaths by warp demons consuming the psykers and thereby enabling them to travel into the material world was one that the Emperor was all too aware of, especially after his Primarchs had been scattered throughout the galaxy. To this end, the astropaths would undergo an extreme and harsh process of toughening against the threat of warp entities. The Emperor himself would manipulate and reform their mind into a protective vessel,
he's a shithead,
making them nearly immune to risks from the warp. This process, though, was agonizing and extremely dangerous. Many psykers were killed in the process or went completely insane. Even if they survived the process, a universal effect would see their optic nerves become damaged beyond repair. This meant all astropaths are blind. From the Imperial perspective, though, this was a necessary consequence, as they continued to be an integral part of Imperial infrastructure. The Crusades had begun, and alongside Space Marines were hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Imperial troops, humans who were salvaged from the aftermath of Terror and structured into an effective, albeit expendable fighting force. This Imperial Guard was strengthened and resupplied
Gizmo
as
has
they
learned about
reconnected
play
and
springs and has
lost
been
human
playing with them
colonies.
nonstop. I love that.
A secondary benefit
I need to
was
get
that in
mine one
drafting
of
local
those.
military forces
Or,
into
well,
the
a couple of
expeditionary
those.
force, it removed these planets' ability to rebel effectively against the newly created Imperial outposts on each planet. Also, in these early days, taxes and tribute to the Imperium were not strictly required, but Imperial commanders stationed on new colonies of the Imperium would often require supplies for the continuing crusade. Many systems and colonies would need help rebuilding, or periods after generations
There's
of
all of
schooling
hers
by
at the bottom of the
iterators
stairs
to
or under
bring
the
them in
stove.
line and
Under
around
the
to
stove is
Imperial truth
relatable for
and
sure.
loyalty to the Imperium. Some worlds, though, who were self-sufficient had survived intact and would even welcome the arriving Imperial forces with open arms as long-awaited brothers, with glorious celebrations and immediate support, much to the satisfaction and pride of the expeditionary forces, who were all too happy to welcome their brothers back to the Imperium. Such events were a blessing to behold, though, as many worlds were either barren wastes long since destroyed, with only ruined remains to prove that anyone had ever existed there, or they were found to be locked in brutally tyrannical dictatorships and required sometimes days, often weeks of orbital and ground assault to subdue and conquer these false dictators. Religious doctrine and faith were especially highlighted to be crushed on all worlds. The Emperor would never allow these practices to infringe or threaten the Imperium, as he was partly responsible and had even seen the effects these caused on humanity millennia ago in the first age of mankind. The Emperor also made an important choice that upon arrival to new worlds, any psykers discovered were told to expect transport back to Terra, courtesy of secretive black ships. Here, they would be tested on their journey back to Earth to their limit. They would endure nightmarish examination, some dying from the trials or executed for being just too unstable. Others, though, ended up completely losing their minds in the process of these harsh examinations. The fate of these individuals was at the time unknown. It later transpired that if they were proven strong and capable enough in manipulating their psychic power, they would become stock for creating new astropaths by the Emperor. Any younger but highly powerful psykers were subsequently distributed to some of the Space Marine legions who had begun a Librarius program, creating special Astartes who were capable of wielding immense psychic power. Others, though, disappeared from record entirely, leading to supposition of secret organizations who even today are not fully disclosed. The Crusade continued for centuries, stretching out across the galaxy. Finally, the Primarchs were reunited with their legions and were duly given positions on the Crusade and Imperial War Council. The Primarch figures, though, were not suited to this level of administration. They were at their best out among their Marines leading campaigns, so it fell to the administrators of Man to run the day-to-day Crusade infrastructure. one important figure arises again, that of Malcador the Sigillite. He would become a keystone in the execution of the Crusade and one of the most loyal and valuable members of the Imperial Council. The power of the Imperium had now reached its peak. There seemed to be little, if anything, that could threaten, damage or destabilise the glory and power of the now reunited Imperium of Man. The Crusade had in fact been so successful that after a chain of impressive victories, the Emperor decided he could fully return to Terra to continue managing his plans there and working on new secret projects. His Primarchs were surely more than capable of finishing the now simple task of scouting and securing any fringe colonies and bringing the Crusade to a successful conclusion. After a specifically great victory on Ulanor, the Emperor selected the first Primarch and commander of the Lunar Wolves, known as Horus Lupercal, and bestowed upon him the title of War Master. This title established him as a leader of the Imperial military forces in lieu of the Emperor, and all other Primarchs and Imperial forces would follow the War Master's commands as if they were the Emperor's. Not all the other Primarchs seemed to be entirely comfortable, not only with this decision, but also with the Emperor's choice to leave them and return to Terra. Considering their strength of character, this seems somewhat surprising, but if anything it shows that their bond they shared with the Emperor was perhaps not rock solid, and some of them felt bewildered he should choose to leave them on the fringes of the galaxy when overall victory seems so near and so secure. Horus, whilst being a supreme master of military matters, was also less well known for being exceptionally tactful and charismatic. He would take time to speak to each of his brother Primarchs in turn. Understanding them as he did, he would employ his various skills of perception and charisma to appeal to their individual natures and reassure them that although the Emperor had granted him this glorious honour, it was the brotherhood together who would achieve the ultimate victory. This helped quell some of the disquiet, but it was not only the Primarchs who felt bemused that the Emperor had abandoned them, and in time, this in combination with other unfortunate events would lead to the darkest of catastrophes. In fact, there have been many examples throughout human history where withholding information would lead to disaster, and this period for humanity would be no exception. The Emperor's decision to not make his Space Marines aware of the dark forces of chaos for their own benefit, in fact even to this day, the vast majority of the Imperial citizenship lives blissfully unaware of the darkness that lies in the Immaterium. The Emperor's precise reasons for this are not crystal clear. Perhaps he felt that humans were too easily persuaded or tempted by the promises of quick, easy power, but whatever the reason, the consequences for the Primarchs and Space Marines to not be able to see this danger, as well as the Imperium, would be disastrous. The Astartes legions had encountered vague clues and shrouded warnings on some lost human worlds they encountered, whispers in the wind, apparent possession of Marines. Horus and his Lunar Wolves discovered direct evidence of some dark force when they encountered a lost but highly advanced human colony known as the Interrex in the later stages of the Expeditionary Crusade. As the fleet travelled to the Interrex homeworld, they engaged in extended peaceful negotiations. Again, this was an example of the Space Marines and notably Horus not giving preference to immediate combat, but in choosing a peaceful option. If this was viable to them, it was always preferable. Their mission of Imperial Truth was without question. It was the only resolution that would ever be acceptable to the fleet though. Now during this encounter, Garviel Loken, who was the Lunar Wolves' 10th captain and a member of the Mournival, the Mournival was a close and under Imperial rule illegal clique of brothers, but one which Horus had allowed to exist so as to help advise him on matters of importance. Loken was among the War Master's party when they attended a reception with these Interrex during negotiations. He was drawn into a casual conversation with one of the Interrex guard, who admitted that the Interrex had learned to tread carefully with any newcomers to their people because they feared the taint of chaos with a K on these newcomers. It becomes apparent that the Interrex colony had made dealings with the Xenos race, the Eldar, during the Age of Strife, and the Interrex explain how it is their understanding from what they could discern from the Eldar that chaos is a threat like no other, that it would not appear brutal or blunt at first, but subtly. They feared chaos deceptively approaching their space, posing as a friend, seeking to bleed its way into their confidences and then destroy them mercilessly from the inside out. Loken was shaken at these unknown revelations. and the War Master Horus would later assure him that there is no fundamental evil in the galaxy, and that is the end of the matter. But the seeds of suspicion are planted. Loken cannot shake this feeling that something somewhere is wrong. But before he'd have any opportunity to follow up and explore these doubts, a break-in occurs in one of the Intrex's most sacred museums, and a highly advanced blade known as an anatheme is stolen. At this time, despite Horus's pleas for restraint, negotiations would now collapse, and the Lunar Wolves and the advanced Intrex would fall into all-out conflict. The Space Marines of Horus are ultimately victorious over the Intrex, but it's a victory Horus takes no pleasure in, as it's born out of misunderstanding and was a tragic, unnecessary conflict. These events, though, would become just a singular fragment in a deteriorating pattern of troubles that would haunt and gesticulate within Horus, as well as his unease then irradiating out into his brother Primarchs, the Mournival, his and other legions. Unbeknownst to Horus, a sequence of events had been now initiated, and their cascade could not be prevented. So why are these events so important? Well, for one, it gives more insight into the fact that at the time it seems barely any Space Marines at any level of rank had any knowledge of chaos. And if they did, it was only the vaguest of suspicions, the kind that could easily be brushed off by speaking to, say, some iterators. They had no idea about the true nature or capabilities of the malevolent force known as chaos. By comparison, the Emperor understood all too well the dark forces that had very recently annihilated the Eldar and consumed so many human colonies throughout the Age of Strife. It seems strange that he would choose not to gift his Astartes, and more importantly his Primarchs, with this information so that they could best protect against its darkness. But perhaps he feared that knowledge of the warp entities would do more harm than good, instead choosing ignorance as the best policy. However, a combination of time, doubt, rejection, jealousy, and greed brewing in corners of the Astartes legions would prove this to be an unwise decision.
That was a big lore dump video, and that's only part 1.
Shop the new arrivals by Ashley Lux, where practical prices meet premium style, like plush boucle upholstery, warm French oak, and high-quality leather made for the spaces you live in most. Shop Ashley Lux in-store and online.
Cannot. pointless intro, but if it's for Horus Heresy, I get it.
The 31st millennium of man would be one of the darkest and most destructive humanity had faced. It would bring the newly established Imperium to its knees and deal wounds so severe it would never truly recover. I need to say that this section of Imperial lore is vastly complex and heavily documented. Bearing that in mind, I'll be covering it in a briefer fashion as specific events can be looked at later in time. However, the 31st millennium is one of the most important periods as it deals with the fall of humanity as a truly dominant power and the inception of the Imperium that would exist into the 41st millennium.
Heresy.
The Horus Heresy. This was essentially a mutiny by several Primarchs and their Space Marine legions, a betrayal against the Emperor and the Imperium instigated by the War Master Horus Lupercal. Now, considering how much is written about these events, it actually takes place over a very short timescale in the general scheme of events in 40k, lasting for only about 7 years. As I already outlined, this rebellion ultimately was orchestrated by, at this time, the unknown forces of chaos. Yet there were many secondary factors, and arguably, even without the influence of chaos, it seems possible that these events could have taken place without dark suggestions from the warp, albeit likely to a lesser extent. The Emperor's return to Terra to establish new projects that, for whatever reason, he was unwilling to also share with even Horus or any of the Primarchs, left them feeling set aside and cast out from his circle of trust. This would lead to feelings of resent or in some outright anger and disgust. This was less though about ego or pride than it was trust, although there is no doubt these emotions were an element in play. Primarchs, despite their demi-godlike stature and ability, were fundamentally human at the core. It was more about their deep connection to the Emperor, and perhaps that they saw themselves not as equal, but at least on a similar level to him. His retreat to Earth and abandonment of them at this juncture certainly left them feeling consigned to the rest of humanity. These feelings were surely only fragments of doubt, not an outright stab to the heart, but nonetheless the seeds of mistrust were sown, and those chinks in the armour of the Imperium were exactly what the dark warp entities of chaos looked for. Another factor in the resentment and frustration felt by the Primarchs and some higher officers in Space Marine legions would be the Council of Terror. This was a governing body charged with the administration and infrastructure control of the Crusade and Imperium as a whole. It was controversial among the Astartes as it comprised an all-human council. Primarchs and Space Marines alike were not given permission to sit with the Terror Council. Their role was for that of war, and all military matters were handled by the War Master. One of the most primary council members was the previously mentioned Malcador the Sigillite. Malcador was no simple man though. He was a psyker of immense power and used these abilities to reach out into the vast realms of space. He was a close aide to the Emperor during Earth's unification wars and is said to have formed the Administratum of Terror. So he is no mere administrator, but a vastly important figure, as important in fact as any Primarch. Some of the Emperor's sons though did not feel that the Imperium should be run by human bureaucrats, and so the Council of Terror would become another chip on the shoulder and a contributing factor to heresy. One last and specific act though would turn at least one Primarch away from the Emperor and continue to raise doubts in others: the disciplining of Lorgar. Lorgar was the Primarch of the Word Bearers, or as they often referred to themselves, the Bearers of the Word. The word referred to is the Emperor's word. However, the Word Bearers were almost fundamentalist in their beliefs. Lorgar believed with every fibre of him that the Emperor himself was a divine being, one true god of mankind. They believed this to the core and preached it across their homeworld as well as any they encountered during the Expeditionary Crusades. But the Emperor had long since outlawed any concept of belief and religion, imposing a strictly secular rule of law in the Imperial Truth to create a constructively rationalist society. For the longest time though, these religious emanations were suspected and tolerated by the Imperial Council, and even to an extent by the Emperor. Eventually, however, the word-bearers came under closer scrutiny by the simple fact that by comparison to other legions they were unbearably slow with their conquest rate during the Crusade. An investigation fleet was sent by the Imperial Council to establish what was causing this slow progress. On arrival at some of the conquered worlds of the word-bearers, they found their answer. To the fleet commander's horror, they had discovered that the word-bearers had been spending years indoctrinating and converting the worlds to the illegal and false faith of the Imperium. This was a tediously slow process and took significantly longer than usual conquests, as was often so bloody due to the worlds initially resisting having an enforced faith. This egregious practice was considered an abject failure of duty by the Imperium and the Emperor himself. Worse still, it came to light that the word-bearers had been employing a standard practice to execute those who did not renounce their faith and accept that of the Imperium and Emperor as the divine faith, which only served to pour more fuel onto the flames of outrage. The Emperor was absolutely enraged by this notion that he should be worshipped as a god, and the actions of the word-bearers in his name, slaughtering those who refused to accept the Emperor's divinity, stank of the religious excesses that had so often poisoned human history, and the Emperor had witnessed firsthand throughout the ages. So the word-bearers had not only broken his principal rules, but also wasted vast amounts of time and resources. All the worlds they had brought into the Imperium had to be purged in an extremely traumatic process, wasting more lives and more resources. To balance these incomprehensible actions, the Emperor would publicly humiliate Lorgar. To publicly reprimand a Primarch in front of his Space Marines and even present humans was an unprecedented act, and it cut Lorgar to the core. In one encounter, his faith was publicly ripped from him by the Emperor, and all the worlds they had conquered were to be purged. Lorgar was beside himself, as were all the word-bearers, to not only have their faith burned away, but to also know that all their years of efforts counted for naught was an unbearable burden to carry. It is said that the Emperor did not want to break and ruin the word-bearers or Lorgar. He was not vindictive in that way. He wanted to merely set them back on the path to being an effective force for the Imperium and mankind. To cure this corruption, the Emperor turned to the glorious Ultramarines and Robert Guilliman, known for his exceptional tact and unflinching loyalty to the Emperor. The Ultramarines were the word-bearers' mirror and shadow alike in so many ways and different in so many others. A living example of what the word-bearers had the potential to be. The Emperor ordered a task force comprised of Ultramarines, his elite personal bodyguards, and the Imperial Council regent Malkador the Sigillite. Their mission? To raise the capital city of the planet Kur to the ground. A planet of high importance to the word-bearers, who considered its capital, Monarchia, the perfect city because of the citizens' intense religious devotion and the sheer number of cathedrals and monuments dedicated to the worship of the Emperor as the god of humanity. Following a temporary mass evacuation of bewildered human citizens who could not understand what crime they had committed, sent out distress signals to the word-bearers, who they considered to be angels. The Ultramarines, though, continued their mission and engaged in the orbital destruction of Monarchia. The Word-Bearers Legion arrived to answer the distress calls of the planet, only to find to their utter confusion the Ultramarines in orbit. The Word-Bearers were ordered to assemble planet-side. 100,000 Marines were ordered within sight of the smouldering, razed ruins of Monarchia, where the Emperor himself stood. The Word-Bearers were forced, along with all others in attendance, including Lorgar, to kneel before him in the ashes of the city, which stood for all they had believed and done in the name of the Emperor and the Imperium. He explained to them in no uncertain terms that they had failed in duty, that their efforts had been futile, and wasted beliefs were an abhorrence. He was no god, no angel, no divine being, but a man. No such belief would be permitted in his Imperium. The emperor departed, leaving a Primarch humiliated and a legion humbled. Lorgar was physically and psychologically numbed by the emperor's actions. The razing of the city of Monarchia was a trauma almost too great for many of the word-bearers to cope with, and had it not been for their strength of genetics, they would have likely been mass suicides and insanity. Lorgar himself, though, fell into a deep melancholy that would burn harder and brighter within him as days turned to weeks turned to months. Why is this sequence of events so important? In the future years of the Imperium, it was said that all that would later come to pass was born in this microcosm, that the mission and humiliation carried out here would be recalled as the catalyst of a galactic civil war. The ruination of the word-bearers is critical in understanding the next sequence of events. They were left reeling from the events on Kur, as well as the ritual humiliation and destruction of the Legion's faith. The fate of the word-bearers at this time is sketchy due to the destructive nature of this period and the events to follow. But it is known that they disappeared for a time, seemingly lost in a whirlwind of confusion, disillusionment, and even rage. The Emperor's hope that they would be set straight on the path of the Imperial truth was flawed, and their resentment hugely underestimated. Instead, they withdrew, wandering the galaxy, seeking, waiting for a light of clarity to guide them. It seems likely that Lorgar's fall began after Monarchia, that the dark powers of the Warp reached out to him in his despair and offered him that which the Emperor had denied him, a divine power to believe in. It is not known whom these voices that counselled him were. It's possible, but entirely speculative, that as with Horus later, some of his closest officers such as Erebus, the word-bearer's first chaplain, would be the first to be corrupted and then begin the spread of darkness. What is certain though is that when the word-bearers reappeared to rejoin the Great Imperial Crusade, they appeared to be refocused as the Emperor had hoped. But this was far from the truth. The word-bearers now no longer served the Emperor or humanity,
hopefully it clears up,
and were the very first Space Marine Legion to fall to the darkness of chaos. The war between humanity and chaos would still not come until more of the Emperor's crusading forces had been seeded with dark betrayal. Horus Lupercal, favourite of the Emperor, War Master of the Crusade, would become the apex of these events. The real treachery would begin on a small planet named Davin. This world had been easily absorbed into the Imperium by Horus and his legion, the Lunar Wolves, some 60 years previously. The warrior people living there quickly realised they were outclassed and bowed to the powers of the Imperium. Horus was impressed with their realism, honour and strength. Spending time there, the Lunar Wolves brought away from Davin the concept of the Warrior Lodge, a close clique of senior brothers who would share their knowledge and opinions evenly, without rank obstruction. The concept of lodges, guilds or clans within a legion or imperial force was strictly outlawed by the Emperor as something which could brew dangerous opinions and dissent, as evidently turned out to be the case. Horus decided that he knew better. Now Erebus, the aforementioned first chaplain of the Word-Bearers, was at this point fully corrupted by chaos. He reported to the Lunar Wolves that Commander Temba, the governor of Davin, and his forces had turned renegade and dug themselves into a fortress on Davin's moon. Horus led an assault force to clear the moon and extract Temba personally. On the surface, his forces were confronted by the foul, reanimated remains of Temba's outpost, who had evidently succumbed to the chaos plague of Nurgle's rot, skewing them into horrific parodies of the human form. Horus slew the grossly altered Temba personally, but not before Temba managed to strike a blow to Horus using the advanced blade, the Anatheme. The Anatheme, you will recall, was the highly advanced blade stolen decades previous by Erebus from the people known as the Interrex. The weapons appeared to be semi-sentient, as the Interrex claimed the weapons could be instructed to recognise a particular person, which gave them the ability to mortally wound that person. The Interrex did not know how to produce these weapons, but had confiscated them from a Xenos race known as the Kinebrak. It seems clear that Erebus orchestrated the whole sequence of events on Davin's moon, and potentially worse, had already been corrupted by Chaos even prior to his theft of the Anatheme from the Interrex years before. The distorted chaos-riddled Tember had been instructed to speak Horus Lupercal's name to the blade. This meant that upon striking the greatest Primarch of the Imperium, it would wound him in such a way as to be beyond even his demi-godlike powers of healing. The fate of the Anatheme would still have importance in the years to come. Horus was taken back to his ship, the Vengeful Spirit, where apothecaries frustratingly determined his wound could not be healed naturally or otherwise. Horus's Mournival, his lodge of closest officers, took him in their despair to the Serpent Lodge on Davin, where Erebus assured them he knew how to heal the Warmaster in a special spiritual ceremony. This was, of course, all part of Erebus's plan. During this ritual, Horus's spirit would be transferred into the warp along with Erebus, disguised as one of the Warmaster's closest friends, Hastur Sejanus, captain of the 4th Company. This out-of-body experience showed Horus a terrifying vision of the future, which unbeknownst to him were caused by his very actions, bringing the Imperium into an age of repressive, violent and superstitious regime where the Emperor and some of the most loyal Primarchs were worshipped as divine beings by the fanatical and ignorant masses of humanity. The Chaos Gods portrayed themselves as the victims of the Emperor's psychic might, who had been suppressed throughout the ages and had no interest themselves in controlling the material world. Horus, already having grown jealous and deeply resentful of the perceived poor treatment at the hands of the Emperor, and was one of many of the Astartes legions afraid of the concept of a peace wherein all for which they had fought would be turned over to weak-willed mortal men, whilst his legions were cast aside and left as peacekeepers without a purpose. These were the Emperor's wishes. For you see, the Astartes were always a tool to save humanity and bring power back to mankind, not just to subjugate it. Horus, in his weakened and embittered state, was very suggestible and would accept this twisted and misunderstood prophecy. But there was one thing Erebus had not counted on. Horus's brother, Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, a legion and chapter who had widely embraced psychers and their unique powers, had continued to study the forbidden arts of warp manipulation and sorcerous powers. The Cyclopean giant of Magnus appeared within Horus's vision, revealing Erebus's true identity and begging Horus not to fall in to the temptations of chaos. It was all in vain though. Horus had by now already decided that if anyone deserved to be worshipped as a god, then it was he. The godlike warp demons of chaos healed Horus's wounds and between them made a deal. In exchange for the immense power he would gain, as well as ruling power over the mortal galaxy, he would deliver to them the Emperor, who the dark chaos gods feared most, as they knew he alone stood with enough power to potentially destroy them. Although Horus had always been an immensely skillful military leader, his true genius was in the manipulation of others. This was often remarked upon by his brother Primarchs, Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists once noting to Garviel Loken, who you remember was the Lunar Wolves captain and a member of the Mournival, that Horus had Loken put forward a campaign of war so his character would be more well known as a peacemaker
Hey, wholesome Calvin.
than a warmonger.
Calvin, how are you?
Dawn said, "You understand
This is what I get for
Horus
trying
had
to
you
read
do
chat
this
with these
morning.
on.
He had
Wholesome
primed the
Calvin.
Mournival
Hello.
to back him, Loken. He is cultivating the air of a peacemaker, for that plays well across the world to the Imperium. This morning he wanted someone other than himself to suggest unleashing the legions for war." This skill of manipulation would be especially important now. It was one thing for the Chaos Aberrations to turn a few men and even a Primarch, but to turn legions and still more Primarchs, the strongest willed and most loyal of the Emperor's forces to Chaos? How would this be possible? Well, it would in part because Horus did not declare himself outright as a disciple of Chaos, nor would he follow immediately the darkest of their practices. As had been the case until now, the game being played was one of subtlety and deception. Horus began implementing throughout the legions the concept of the Mournival, that he had allowed first within the Lunar Wolves. The Mournival Lodge enabled officers to group together in secret and lay the seeds of discontent and mutiny. Horus would also capitalize on the current negative feelings among some of his fellow Primarchs, and then the refracted disillusionment among some of the legions. Lorgar and the Word Bearers had already turned to chaos following their world-shattering humiliation by the Emperor. Horus would engage legions of Astartes, Imperial troops, and even several Mars Titan legions with the principal concept that Horus now perceived the Emperor, powerful as he was, did not deserve the unreserved praise and recognition of the human race. More Astartes legions would now join the traitors, Angron and the World Eaters, Mortarion and his Death Guard, Fulgrim and the Emperor's children were among the first to side with the War Master. Others would later fall, including the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Alpha Legion, and lastly, the Thousand Sons. It had become clear that the Primarchs were far from the perfect demigod-like human form they were perceived to be. Although technically each Primarch was physically and mentally godlike compared to a standard human, they still bore all of humanity's virtues as well as their flaws such as ego, greed, envy, arrogance, rage, and more besides. These superhuman warriors were meant to be the saviors of mankind, but instead they could be the downfall of everything that had been salvaged and achieved. The Thousand Sons Legion would be a particularly tragic story. Their Primarch Magnus the Red, who you remember had attempted to prevent Horus from falling to darkness whilst experiencing his out-of-body experience to the warp on Davin. Magnus and the Thousand Sons Legion had begun to use psychic powers and warp sorcery as part of their legion's general practices. This was actually outlawed by the Emperor, who was cautious of using psychic power in only controlled services. It's surprising they chose this path to break with Imperial law. However, it seems that they actually bore a natural affinity for such practices, and as with many things, likely started out small before becoming more widespread. In time, many Space Marine legions and chapters would use sanctioned psychers in the new librarian branch of the forces, but in these early days there was no regulation or established command. As a consequence, many of the Thousand Sons Marines would suffer whole body deterioration, as they would eventually become consumed by the warp powers, unable to control or prevent this. It was for this reason that Magnus the Red was able to travel into the warp and see Horus in his most dire of situations. Magnus, after this incident, was so grief-stricken that rather than physically travel to Earth and speak to the Emperor, which now in hindsight would have been the far better choice, he chose to use his psychic power to reach out and speak to the Emperor himself at the Imperial Palace on Terra. But this would shatter all the psychic wards the Emperor had placed on the palace,
the shit out of the top of this.
severely damage the project being secretly worked on by the Emperor. This itself was connected to the psychic paths of the Webway, the gateways used by the Eldar, and previously the Old Ones. This choice by Magnus was catastrophic and a rash miscalculation. His psychic assault on the Imperial Palace, his panic and frustration and anger and trauma gave free rein to the warp and its evil inhabitants to invade Terra. Millions of psychers died instantly as their attuned minds were burned out or demons tore them apart. Warp storms consumed entire settlements, shockwaves flattened structures around the world. Having strictly outlawed Magnus's use of sorcery and refusing to believe that Horus, his most trusted son, would betray him, the Emperor concluded wrongly for the traitor to be Magnus and the Thousand Sons.
Magnus did nothing
This error
wrong.
would be yet another travesty of judgment among the many during this whole sorry period. The Emperor ordered Leman Russ and his Space Wolves to engage and destroy Magnus and the Thousand Sons. But Magnus, now defeated physically and mentally, cast out by his father, they were turned away from the Imperium and into traps to entice them into the darkness of chaos. Horus was all too aware that there were some Primarchs and Legions too loyalist to ever be persuaded away from the Imperium, such as the Imperial Fists, Ultramarines, Blood and Dark Angels. Horus would instead send these legions far away to the far reaches of the Empire on missions designed to keep them busy, while the traitors would descend on Earth to destroy the Imperium and, most critically, the Emperor himself. As we outlined earlier, there would now take place many events which would lead some further astray and for the Emperor to become more aware that something was extremely wrong in the Imperium. These can be covered in more detail later. Magnus of the Thousand Suns was for the Emperor, as far as he was aware, a lone corrupter, distorted by his unlicensed use of the warp. This, of course, was sadly the extreme opposite of the actual situation, but the extreme destruction and loss of life on Earth after it had been contained, as well as the damage to the Emperor's ongoing Gateway project, would be enough to cloud his judgment. Horus, though, would now move up to expand upon the early seeds of betrayal in the following campaigns of the Isstvan system. Horus would order the virus bombing of Isstvan III, a planet that had declared itself separate from the Imperium. Many loyalist marines from traitor legions were actually planetside when Horus and the orbital navy performed exterminatus on the planet, killing all 12 billion inhabitants, including the space marines from multiple legions. Horus watched from orbit, declaring, "Let the galaxy burn." The virus bombs laid waste to the planet, devouring any organic material they encountered, disintegrating humans and seeping into the suits and armour of any Astartes. The storms of the virus raged until the planet was nothing more than a barren desert. The few remaining loyalist space marines would eventually be butchered by their brothers until Horus ordered an orbital bombardment until nothing remained alive on the surface of Isstvan III. Enter Captain Garrow of the 7th Company Death Guard Legion. Nathaniel Garrow is one of my favourite heroes of the Horus Heresy and perhaps all of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, namely because he was fundamentally responsible for saving the Imperium. His unwavering loyalty and strength of character, which apparently went beyond even some of the Primarchs. He is also a legendary character of the age because of what he would become later after the period of heresy, but again, that is another story. Garrow bore witness to the massacre on Isstvan III and was quick to understand the real horror not only of this specific event but what was happening at large. Realizing that he would have to escape not only the fleet of the War Master, the sons of Horus, previously the Lunar Wolves, and the Emperor's children, but also his own legion, they would make a warp jump aboard an old fleet ship, the Eisenstein. Without having time to chart its route or destination, this left them then marooned, as well as being subject to multiple attacks from the warp by the dark forces of chaos and the specific deity Nurgle, who had corrupted and mutated his own Death Guard Legion. Despite all this, they survived and proceeded to detonate their ship's core in the vain hope of attracting a ship to come and rescue them. Luckily for the crew, they succeeded, and the vessel approaching turned out to be an Imperial Fist's Astartes barge containing none other than the Primarch Rogol Dawn himself. Trying to convince Dawn of Horus and the other legions' betrayal, though, was a near impossible task. The suggestion sent him into such a fit of rage he nearly executed Garrow on the spot, and would have been doomed to failure were it not for the Remembrancers. The Remembrancers were an order of historians, journalists and civilians from Earth at the time who were sent along with the expeditionary fleets of the Great Crusade. Their function was to chronicle deeds, events and generally record the history so that we could then hold that for the future Imperium of Man. Remembrancers were generally seen as very reliable sources of information, especially those who had any psychic capabilities, if they were psychers, and could actually record information simply by visualizing that, by seeing it. And when Rogol Dawn could actually see the events that had unfolded, he had no choice but to accept them. Returning to Terra, Dawn would speak to the Emperor, and finally the betrayal and heresy would come into the light. Garrow, though, in immense frustration despite all his efforts, was not able to speak to the Emperor himself, but was stationed on the lunar colony along with the remaining loyalist Death Guard and Imperial Navy crew of the Eisenstein. The Imperial forces on Earth considered their presence too dangerous to allow them to roam freely. Horus Lupercal had now extinguished the last shreds of loyalty from the 3 legions under his command, who were now complete in their misguided transition to chaos. His next target in the campaign was Istvan V. Here, he would establish a command post and reinforce his position. The Emperor, now in a fit of despair and rage at the actions of Horus, commanded 7 legions of Astartes to attack and subdue the traitors, and subsequently return them to Terra to face their actions. However, unbeknownst to the Emperor, at least half of these legions had already been deceived and strayed from loyalty to the Imperium. They had not yet made their stance clear, but represented a dangerous deception to the Imperium. The first wave of attacks to Istvan V were carried out by the Loyalist legions, the Salamanders, the Raven Guard, and the Iron Hands. Horus had already been passed information of their landing sites, and this would cost them horrific losses at this initial contact. Worse would come though. The 4 remaining legions to attack were no longer loyal to the Imperium. The Night Lords, Word Bearers, Iron Warriors, and Alpha Legion descended to attack in a brutal combined assault, slaughtering the remnants of the 3 Imperial legions. This event would be known from here on as the Istvan V Drop Site Massacre. Things looked dark for the Imperium. The strongest legions were still tasked to the fringes of the galaxy, and there seemed little to stand between Horus and his now 7-strong fleet of Astartes legions. Not to mention the further forces of corrupted Imperial Navy, the victorious Dark Mechanicum, who were fighting the Schism of Mars, a civil war between factions on Mars loyal to the Imperium and Horus, and now successfully they had won their campaign there. The traitor legions on Horus would assault and destroy many loyal Imperial bastions as they travelled towards Terra, taking years to do so in the process.
Okay, chap.
By now, the War Master had amassed a massive army comprising multiple groups including Titans, Astartes, and advanced war gear, corrupted Imperial forces, and even cultists from worlds who could spread discord and disrupt Imperial worlds.
We
through
still have so
terrorism
much
or
left to
cult
do.
activity. The
But
Word Bearers especially
now.
revelled in this, often finding that their worlds, previously they converted to the divinity of the Emperor, were more than willing, within a fairly short space of time, to worship them again as gods or
That's my head.
angels, and were a great asset to factor into their battle tactics and use where appropriate these expendable, gullible souls to support their forces. Fortunately for the Imperium, one thing was slowing down Horus and his legions: logistics. Despite acquiring a massive force, Horus found he was unable to move it efficiently around given the limitations of the warp vessels in his fleet.
Okay, this is kind of where we're at right now. Got the base coat. Where are we? Come on, find it. There we go. Oh. Come on. There we go. We got the base coat, and everywhere that we're going to do Abaddon Black, we have to do the metallic trim, which will be around the armor and on the chest and at the top part of the gun. That's why that's... So we have the bronze metallic trim and then the silver metallic. And then other than that, it'll just be like doing the purity seals and the leather brown for the leather pouches, and then doing their lenses red. So these two are the big ones. I still have to do like the Nuln Oil washing and stuff. These are just Space Marines Adderall. So this box that I got is a combat patrol, so it's 13 minis that would serve as its own army. So it's really, really nice for somebody who's never, or who doesn't have any minis. You could pick up this whole box and go and play a game. But yeah, these are just Space Marines. So this squad here is the Infernus squad. They have these flamethrowers and stuff. And then we have 5 Terminators, which have like the bolt pistols and stuff. And then we have a captain and a librarian, which is a psyker. And then a homing device. So we're working on the Infernus squad because it's a pretty straightforward deal. But yeah. They're looking pretty alright. Obviously I have to work on the base and stuff, but that's at the end. They're getting there. I'm happy with the base coat, and I'm happy with everywhere that the black went in. So we'll do some contrast and highlighting and stuff next time. All right, friends. Holy moly, thank you so much for $6,358 raised for St. Jude. When I stream tomorrow, we'll still have one more day to get that number as high as we would like. And then we'll be at the end of the month-long campaign, which has far exceeded my expectations. So I very much appreciate you guys. All right, I am getting out of here. I appreciate you guys. Have a wonderful Saturday, and I will see you next time. Bye.